When others time travel, they become wealthy beyond measure, surrounded by beautiful women. Even if they aren't rich, they can still show off by reciting poetry, and thus ascend to new heights in life. My time travel has landed me in prison. What kind of nonsense is this? Give me back my male protagonist script. The world he traveled to not only has humans, demons, and ghosts, but also highly dangerous beings like Buddha. And the capital he's in is a treacherous place. One misstep could cost him his life. But who cares? I'm the protagonist. I have incredible luck. I can turn calamity into fortune. Every day, I find money and visit brothels. Life is carefree. But this is just Su Qian's surface. Deep down, even he doesn't know that he's just a pawn in the hands of an old schemer, a mere chess piece. At the start of the story, Su Qian was still dreaming, but suddenly, a pungent smell hit him like a wave. He thought it must be that smart dog of his, defecating on the bed again. But when he opened his eyes, a massive butt was right in his face. Su Qian instinctively reached out to push it away, but the next moment, the dog disappeared. Instead, something else was in his hand. He was now in the capital's prison. But he clearly remembered that yesterday he was at a bar, celebrating his promotion and raise with that bunch of misfits. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his head. Su Qian felt like his brain was about to explode. Memories that weren't his own began flooding into his mind. Su Qian, courtesy name Mingyan. His father died in the Shanghai War 19 years ago. His mother passed away from illness soon after. He was raised by his uncle from a young age. He trained in martial arts for years, reaching the peak of the refinement stage at 18, but he stagnated after that. Thanks to his uncle's connections, he became a constable in the Chang'an County under the capital's jurisdiction. Only then did Su Qian realize he had time traveled, and he was still a constable. Even in this new world, he was back in his old profession. As for why he was in prison, it was because 3 days ago, his uncle, Su Zhiping, a 7th-rank official, was escorting a shipment of tax silver to the treasury. But along the way, 150,000 taels of silver went missing. The emperor was furious. He personally ordered Su Zhiping's execution in 5 days. The male members of the family were to be exiled to the frontier, and the female members sent to the government brothel. As Su Zhiping's nephew, Su Qian was dismissed from his post and thrown into the capital's prison. And now, he only had 2 days left before his exile to the frontier. This was definitely a hellish start. In this world, feudal dynasties still ruled. Human rights were non-existent. What was the frontier like? A desolate wasteland, with harsh climates. Most prisoners exiled there didn't survive 10 years, and many didn't even make it to the frontier, dying from accidents or illnesses along the way. Su Qian swallowed hard, hoping there was still a way out. He whispered, calling for his system. System, dear system, please show up. But after a long while, Su Qian was left looking like a fool, calling out for nothing. There was no system. I have to save myself. I can't just die like this. So he came up with his first plan. Escape. As a 9th-rank martial artist, at the peak of the refinement stage, his physical abilities were terrifying. But in this world, he was just a low-tier fighter. The escape plan was dead on arrival. His second plan. Rely on family and friends. But the Su family wasn't a powerful clan, and its members were scattered. With 150,000 taels of tax silver stolen, who would dare to plead for mercy at such a critical moment? This plan was definitely not going to work. That left only one option. According to the laws of the Great Feng Dynasty, redeeming oneself through merit could exempt one from the death penalty. But to achieve that, he would have to recover the stolen silver. And now, trapped in prison, without detailed case files, his current situation was truly dire. Screaming for help wouldn't do any good. Just then, someone entered with the jailer to visit. This person stopped right in front of Su Qian. It was Su Xinyan, courtesy named Sijio, the son of his uncle Su Zhiping, his cousin, a newly appointed scholar of the Great Feng Dynasty, studying at Yunlu Academy, and a master of eloquent insults. He remembered that the original host didn't have a good relationship with this cousin. This time, Su Xinyan came to tell Su Qian that the officials escorting him to the frontier had accepted 300 taels from Su Xinyan. This was all the money their family had left. It would ensure Su Qian a safe journey, with no accidents along the way. Su Xinyan's status as a scholar had already been revoked, but with the protection of his academy's teachers, he wouldn't be exiled. Su Qian stared at Su Xinyan's calm expression. He knew that perhaps Su Xinyan's punishment wasn't just the revocation of his status. He might also be demoted, with his descendants barred from the imperial exams, forever unable to rise again. Moreover, the female members of the Su family would be sent to the government brothel in 2 days to suffer humiliation. Su Xinyan was a scholar. How could he continue to live in the capital with such shame? Su Qian directly pointed out his intention. You're planning to commit suicide, aren't you? Su Xinyan looked at his cousin in shock. With just a few words and a few expressions, Su Qian had guessed his plan. But Su Xinyan stubbornly turned his head away, coldly saying, "What does it matter to you?" Then, after a pause, he softened a bit. After all, They were family. With determination, he said, "You should live well." After saying that, he turned to leave. Su Qian grabbed him. "Don't joke around. It's not time to give up yet." He stared intently at Su Qian and solemnly said, "The case files. Help me get the case files on the stolen tax silver. Modern investigative techniques, crime scene investigation, surveillance, and forensic analysis are essential." But in ancient times, there was no surveillance. No one died in the tax silver theft case, and Su Qian was trapped in prison. The only breakthrough now was the case files. Fortunately, the files could partially reconstruct the crime scene, but Su Qian didn't understand why Su Qian needed the files. If Su Qian had said, "I want to solve the case," Su Qian would have thought he had lost his mind. So Su Qian made up an excuse. "I want to know the details of the case. If I'm going to die, I should at least know why." Su Qian didn't think much of it. "I've seen the files. I can tell you." But Su Qian refused. Oral accounts are meaningless. He needed to know every detail of the case. Oral accounts often unintentionally omit parts deemed unimportant. Su Qian didn't say anything more and turned to leave. As Su Qian's figure grew distant, Su Qian thought, life or death depends on what happens next. After a long while, the sound of footsteps grew closer. Su Qian had returned. He had written down the case files word for word. Su Qian eagerly sat down to read them, completely ignoring what Su Qian was saying behind him. Su Qian. This would be the last time they would see each other. "Take care," he said before turning to leave. Su Qian, meanwhile, was fully immersed in the case files. His fate now rested on what he could uncover. After a long while, Su Qian sighed. It turns out that reading is still very useful. If the original host had been illiterate, he wouldn't have been able to understand these cryptic symbols. 3 days ago, at the second hour of the Mao period, around 6:30 a.m., Su Jiping was escorting a shipment of tax silver at the first hour of the Chen period, around 7 a.m., the convoy had just crossed a bridge on Guangnan Street when a strange wind suddenly blew up. The horses panicked and bolted into the river by the street. Then, a deafening explosion was heard, and the river water surged 6 zhang, about 20 meters, high, creating massive waves. The soldiers jumped into the river to search for the silver, but only recovered 1,250 taels. The rest of the silver had vanished without a trace. Su Qian was baffled. What kind of nonsense is this? Meanwhile, in the back hall of the capital prefecture, a group of high-ranking officials was discussing the case. The prefect of the capital prefecture, Chen Hongguang, said, "His Majesty has ordered us to recover the stolen tax silver before Su Jiping's execution. But now, we only have 2 days left. You two must hurry." Li Yuchen, one of the officials, asked, "Has Su Jiping provided any new information?" The prefect sighed. "He's just a martial artist. All he does is shout about his innocence. He doesn't even know how the silver was stolen." Chu Kaiwei, another official, chimed in, "I used my divination skills to observe him. Su Jiping isn't lying." Chu Kaiwei was the youngest disciple of the Imperial Astrology Bureau. The group was growing increasingly frustrated. The prefect continued, "We've investigated and interrogated Su Jiping thoroughly. We've looked into his social connections and financial status, and with the help of the Imperial Astrology Bureau's techniques, we've ruled out his involvement. But since the tax silver is still missing, Su Jiping will still face the death penalty." Meanwhile, Chu Kaiwei, seemingly unaffected by the tension, was munching on sugarcane. Li Yuchen glared at her, annoyed by her lack of concern. Just then, a piece of sugarcane fell to the ground. Li Yuchen, who had a touch of obsessive-compulsive disorder, immediately picked it up and placed it back where it belonged. He felt a sense of relief after doing so. At that moment, a servant entered with a bag of buns and a letter from the Imperial Astrology Bureau. The letter was handed to Chu Kaiwei. After reading it, she announced, "The Imperial Astrology Bureau reports that no traces of demonic activity were detected within 20 li, about 10 kilometers, along the river. There are no signs of demonic presence on the riverbanks either." This news made the officials even more anxious. The prefect slammed the table. Where could 150,000 taels of silver have been taken? It must have been brought ashore somewhere. It's been 3 days, and we still haven't found any trace of the culprits. Li Yuchen, however, remained calm. "Perhaps we're looking in the wrong direction. Maybe it wasn't the work of demons." The prefect retorted, "If it wasn't demons, then where did the strange wind come from? And how did the silver vanish into thin air?" Meanwhile, Su Qian, still engrossed in the case files, noticed a crucial clue. If it was the work of demons, why would the water surge so high? And why would the riverbanks be damaged? In this world, demons existed. They had coexisted with humans for centuries, hunting and preying on each other. In the southern region, within the 10,000 mountains, there was a massive demon settlement known as the 10,000 Demon Kingdom. A century ago, the Western nations, led by the Buddhist sects, declared war on the 10,000 Demon Kingdom. The war lasted for 60 years, and ultimately, the Demon Kingdom was destroyed. This event was recorded in history as the 60-year demon extermination. Since then, the demon race had declined, while Buddhism flourished. But the prefect was still puzzled. What would demons want with tax silver? Demons act on instinct. But stealing silver doesn't align with their nature. Suqian, however, was beginning to piece together the puzzle. He realized that the key to solving the case might lie in understanding the true nature of the demonic activity. As he delved deeper into the files, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was still a way to uncover the truth and save himself, but time was running out. And the stakes were higher than ever. Suqian knew he had to act quickly. The fate of his family and his own life depended on it. Acting recklessly, Li Yuchen sighed. He couldn't figure it out either. Just then, Chu Kaiwei spoke up. If it was the work of demons, wouldn't human flesh be more appealing to them? Why would they want silver? But as soon as she finished speaking, she looked at the bun in her hand and couldn't help but think of human flesh. The thought made her nauseous, but for a foodie like her, wasting food was a sin. So she continued devouring the buns, one after another. In no time, she had finished all the buns in her hand. Then she calmly said, to demons, silver might not be as tempting as living humans. Even if they wanted silver, stealing or robbing would be safer than directly targeting the tax silver in the capital. The prefect pondered for a moment. That makes sense. Fuyin pondered for a moment. That makes sense. But it's not impossible that someone is behind this. However, Li Yuchen was puzzled. Who would instruct a demon to steal the tax silver? What's the reason? Why does it have to be this batch of tax silver? Why exactly 150,000 taels of silver? Fuyin was also baffled. Perhaps the mastermind behind this needs a huge sum of money, but cannot amass wealth recklessly. That's why they targeted the tax silver. But Li Yuchen pointed out another suspicious detail. The route for transporting the tax silver is random, decided temporarily by Su Jiping. Yet, the ambush in the river was set up in advance. There's likely a mole within the escort team. Then he suggested, let's go to Yunlu Academy and consult the Confucian sage for guidance. But Chu Kaiwei, who was standing nearby, was displeased. Are you looking down on the forgetfulness tree of the 4 heavenly swords? I've already said, the clans escorting the tax silver were completely unaware. Li Yuchen didn't dare respond. He couldn't afford to offend the 4 heavenly swords. But the next moment, Chu Kaiwei shifted her attention herself. Before sunset, she had to shake off this troublesome task and leave Jinzhou Prefecture, heading to the capital to find the eldest princess. Just thinking about the delicacies in the palace made her drool uncontrollably. Fuyin had no choice. The case was progressing slowly, and time was of the essence. Lordly, why not consult Duke Wei? Hearing this, Li Yuchen coldly snorted. You civil officials have your methods, and we night watchmen have ours. This is the test Duke Wei has given me. Fuyin sighed. This wasn't working, and that wasn't working. Now, the entire court is watching us. Meanwhile, in the prison, Su Qian was staring blankly at the case files. I once thought about traveling back to ancient times, reciting the book of songs to show off, and maybe even flirting with some girls. Who would have thought that even after time traveling, I'd still face the harsh realities of society? If it really was the work of demons, then there's nothing I can do. But this is just Jinzhou Prefecture speculation. I can't let their assumptions influence me. I need to analyze this myself. Maybe there's still hope. Why would demons steal tax silver? For them, isn't human flesh more appealing? Even if they lack silver, there's no need to target tax silver. The scriptures say that demon women are alluring and graceful, with enchanting figures. I wonder if there are catgirls or doggirls. His thoughts drifted too far, so Su Qian promptly slapped himself. After all, he was known to everyone as a righteous gentleman. What constitutes effective reasoning? After slapping himself, Su Qian began analyzing with a serious expression. This tax silver case has 2 suspicious points. First, the demonic wind. Aside from martial artists, most cultivation systems have the ability to summon demonic winds. Therefore, the demonic wind only proves that a cultivator was involved. This reduces the suspicion on my second uncle, who is a martial artist, although it's still possible he conspired with others. Second, the explosion. In high-level cultivator battles, explosions are common, but in this case, there was no physical confrontation, so the explosion is unreal. Unless it was necessary. Among the cultivation systems in this world, what profession requires explosions to achieve its goals? Thinking of this, he suddenly realized he had been led astray. He had made the same mistake as Jinzhou Prefecture, judging solely based on the most obvious clues in the case. This was too hasty. He needed to change his approach. Suppose this was a meticulously planned human conspiracy? Perhaps the flaw isn't in the 2 most obvious clues, but in these various traces. Suddenly, Su Qian's mind seemed to explode with clarity. He hurriedly banged on the iron door, shouting, and soon enough, he was noticed by the jailer. What are you yelling about? The jailer asked impatiently, but Su Qian looked triumphant. Tell Fuyin that I have important clues about the tax silver case. Meanwhile, Fu-yin and the others, having run out of ideas, were planning to take the case files to the night watchman's office to seek Duke Wei's help. Chu Kaiwei kindly reminded them, with our great Phoenix's Grandmaster stepping in, you two won't be held accountable by His Majesty. But in Duke Wei's mind, losing points was worse than being questioned by the Emperor. Li Yuchen remained silent. But what else could they do? At that moment, a servant rushed in to report, Prefect, Su Zhiping's nephew, Su Qian, claims to have important clues about the tax silver case. Fu-yin was startled. Without caring whether it was true or not, he ordered, bring him here for questioning. Moments later, Su Qian, shackled hand and foot, slowly walked into the Jinzhou prefecture office. Su Qian observed the scene. The man in the official robe was likely Fu-yin, a fourth-rank official. The man next to him, with a silver emblem on his chest, was probably from the Night Watchman organization. But then his gaze froze. This lady is quite beautiful. I wonder if she's married. Then his eyes drifted downward, and he saw a flat chest. His interest waned immediately. He quickly bowed and said, Greetings, my lord. Fu-yin didn't waste time. Su Qian, 3 days ago when you were imprisoned, you didn't mention having important clues. Do you know the consequences of withholding information? Su Qian thought to himself, this old fox of an official, even though he's desperate, refuses to ask directly. But just being here meant his plan was halfway successful. My lord, Su Erlang came to see me earlier, and I asked him for the case files. From them, I deduced the truth of the case. Fu-yin and Li Yuchen were stunned. Just from the files? Su Qian calmly replied, exactly. The tax silver case wasn't the work of demons, but of humans. When someone says something beyond your understanding, your first instinct is to refute it. Then you look for evidence to prove them wrong. When Su Qian said the tax silver case wasn't the work of demons but humans, Fu-yin exploded. You brat. You're talking nonsense. The demons stealing the tax silver is almost a settled fact. Guards, drag him out and give him 200 lashes. Su Qian was stunned. I just said one thing, and I get 200 lashes? Is there no law anymore? The guards didn't care and moved to drag him away, but then a voice called out, wait. It was Li Yuchen. He was curious why Su Qian would dare say such a thing. Su Qian sighed in relief. According to the city gate guard's testimony, my second uncle entered the city at Mao hour, and at Chen hour, the tax silver convoy arrived at Guangnan Street. Then a strange wind arose, spooking the horses and causing them to rush into the river. Fu-yin impatiently interrupted. Enough. This is all common knowledge. What's your point? Su Qian continued. My point is, the wind, we already know this. The demons hid in the river, waiting to steal the tax silver. Su Qian interrupted. No, the demonic wind and explosion were just distractions, to make you overlook a fatal flaw. Fu-yin and the others were startled. There was a flaw they hadn't noticed? Su Qian continued. My second uncle was escorting 150,000 taels of silver. May I ask the three of you? How much does 150,000 taels of silver weigh? The three of them fell silent. Who knew how much that was? Su Qian sighed. Answering his own question wasn't cool at all. It's 9,375 caddies. Chu Kaiwei was confused. What does that prove? Su Qian felt exhausted. What does it prove? It proves that you're not very bright, little sister. Su Qian continued. From the city gate to Guangnan Street, how far is it? 30 li. How many busy markets does it pass through? 4. Li Yuchen was about to answer, but then he realized a serious problem. The timeline didn't add up. Guangnan Street was 30 li from the South City Gate. With the horse's speed and passing through 4 busy markets, entering the city at Mao hour, it was impossible to reach Guangnan Street by Chen hour. Li Yuchen was shocked. But the not-so-bright little sister still didn't understand. The tax silver was indeed escorted to Guangnan Street at Chen hour. Many people saw the horses rush into the river. It couldn't be fake. How do you explain that? Li Yuchen couldn't answer. He only knew the timeline didn't add up. Su Qian explained. Because what was being wasn't silver. Fu-yin couldn't sit still. This is nonsense. Not to mention whether your second uncle and the escorting clans had eyes or not. The case files include testimonies from witnesses. The horses rushed into the river, and shiny silver ingots rolled into the water. How could that be fake? Su Qian knew that words alone wouldn't convince them. So he borrowed paper and pen, scribbled something on it, and handed it to Fu-yin. My lord, please prepare the items listed here, as I've requested. Fu-yin took the paper and looked at it. Although he didn't know what Su Qian was planning, his first reaction was, this handwriting is really ugly. Chu Kaiwei took a look and thought, what is this? Just some ordinary scribbles from a martial artist. Everyone looked at it. Li Yuchen naturally wanted to see too, but when he took it, the corner of the paper was crumpled, making him feel uncomfortable all over. He quickly smoothed it out with his hands, and instantly felt the world was beautiful again. After a while, the items Su Qian requested were ready. Fu Yin said coldly, "Everything is here. Make sure you give me a satisfactory explanation." But Su Qian wasn't in a hurry to start. Instead, he bowed and said, "If I help you solve this case, can you petition His Majesty to exonerate my family?" Fu Yin nodded. "According to the laws of Great Phoenix, if you help solve the case, your family's crimes will be pardoned." With that assurance, Su Qian had no more worries. He turned around and began preparing. What's it like for a modern person to travel back to ancient times and conduct a chemistry experiment? Su Qian prepared water, salt, iron wire, rice paper, bamboo sticks, and candles. Everything was ready. Although he wasn't sure if the exploding tack silver was what he thought, that wasn't important. What mattered was opening a new perspective. To explain the phenomenon of the exploding tack silver, what he needed to do now was simple. Use the chemistry knowledge he learned in high school to extract metallic sodium. Step 1. Dissolve coarse salt in. Step 2. Cover the cup with rice paper, then slowly pour in the salt water. Step 3. Place the filtered salt water over a candle flame to heat it. Step 4. Stir continuously with a bamboo stick until the water evaporates, leaving behind sodium chloride crystals. Now comes the hardest part: electricity and the melting point of sodium chloride. In ancient times, these two were nearly impossible to achieve. But in this world, there's a profession that can do it. He turned to Chu Kaiwei. "My lord, are you a disciple of the astrology bureau?" Su Qian asked this because Chu Kaiwei was wearing a Bagua amulet, something only disciples of the astrology bureau would use. Chu Kaiwei proudly replied, "My master is the astrologer." Su Qian ignored her pride and said, "Sister, could you help me melt these crystals?" Chu Kaiwei hesitated. "Melting is a skill only alchemists possess. I'm just a 7th-rank geomancer." But her master had given her a magical tool. With a wave of her hand, flames burst forth. Su Qian quickly stepped back. As the flames landed on the crystals, he called for her to stop at the right moment, then inserted the iron wire. Next, he asked Chu Kaiwei to generate electricity. Su Qian sighed inwardly. This step was difficult and might fail many times. But Chu Kaiwei, with a flick of her wrist, drew electricity from her Bagua amulet. A crackling sound followed as the electricity struck the crystals. Su Qian quickly called for her to stop. Now, all that was left was anxious waiting. Luckily, luck was on his side. Metallic sodium was successfully extracted. Su Qian poured it out and said, "My lords, look at this. This is much lighter than silver, but it looks almost identical. Could someone have used this to counterfeit silver?" Fu Yin picked it up and examined it. Indeed, it was much lighter. If this was what was being transported that day, everything made sense. Chu Kaiwei asked, "Are you an alchemist too?" Su Qian awkwardly scratched his head. "I'm just a chemistry enthusiast." Fu Yin then focused on the key point. "What about the explosion?" Su Qian wasn't in a hurry to explain. He took the metallic sodium and dropped it into water. The water began to boil violently, and moments later, the cup exploded. Everyone was shocked. How is this possible? This scene made netizens exclaim, "Without chemistry knowledge, I wouldn't dare time travel." Su Qian explained, "When metallic sodium reacts with water, it causes an explosion. This explains what happened when the silver fell into the river." Li Yuchen pondered. "So, from the beginning, we were misled. The mastermind used the explosion and demonic wind as distractions to shift the focus of the investigation. No wonder the Astrology Bureau's spirit detection didn't find any demons." Chu Kaiwei was also stunned. "I told you from the start that no demons were detected, but you didn't believe me." Su Qian quickly interjected, afraid they'd start arguing. After the silver fell into the water, only a little over 1,000 taels were recovered. If I'm not mistaken, those were placed on top to deceive people. Li Yuchen turned his attention back to Su Qian. This young man had connected all the dots. He truly was a genius. Just as he was about to praise Su Qian, he noticed Su Qian's wrinkled clothes. His obsessive-compulsive tendencies kicked in, but he forced himself to stay calm. He placed a heavy hand on Su Qian's shoulder and subtly straightened his clothes. Then, with a serious expression, he said, "Well done." Su Qian smiled, knowing he had succeeded. The case was finally solved. In the next moment, the whole world seemed to brighten up. However, Su Qian misunderstood the situation. He felt a pat on his shoulder. Could it be that this official appreciated him? At that moment, Fu Ying spoke up. "Since the silver is fake, where did the real silver go?" Chu Kaiwei speculated that the tax silver had been transported to the capital, passing through many hands. If they were to investigate, a large number of officials would be imprisoned. Recovering the silver would be as difficult as finding a needle in a haystack. This matter was beyond their authority, and they needed to report it to the emperor. Li Yuchen sighed. The tax silver had been escorted all the way to the capital, passing through many hands. If it was fake, it should have been discovered earlier. The only possibility was that it had been swapped recently. Fu Yin was startled by this statement. Swapped recently? He then hurriedly rushed out. The guards were called, and he prepared to leave. Seeing him in such a hurry, Su Qian's wife quickly followed him. Lord Fu-yin, please don't forget your promise to this commoner. But Fu-yin did not respond. Su Qian sighed inwardly, hoping that the tax silver would be recovered before he was exiled. If it was recovered after his exile, even if the silver was found, it wouldn't change the fate of the Su family. And what if Fu-yin was a corrupt official, trying to take all the credit for himself? Then he could only leave it to fate. But at that moment, a sweet voice called out, "Why can rock turn into silver?" Then, Chu Kaiwei rummaged through a bag and pulled out a sugar cane. Su Qian exclaimed, "Is this Doraemon's treasure bag?" Then, Chu Kaiwei handed the sugar cane to Su Qian. "Here, you can have this." Su Qian was stunned. Is this how you test an official? You're challenging my weakness." But then he said, "This commoner has read in ancient texts about alchemy that can turn rock into silver." Chu Kaiwei eagerly asked, "What ancient texts?" Su Qian thought to himself, "Do you understand high school chemistry? The ancient texts were destroyed, but I still remember some of the content. However, I am in grave danger now, and I really don't have the mood to think about ancient texts." Chu Kaiwei sighed, "You're quite cunning. RC Tianjin does not interfere with politics. Your fate will be decided by the emperor." Su Qian put on a flattering smile and said, "Why don't you take me as your disciple? With Lord Jianzheng's status in the court, it shouldn't be a problem to spare a criminal like me." But Chu Kaiwei was puzzled. "You're clearly a martial artist. Why do you want to become an alchemist?" Su Qian declared righteously, "Because I admire Lord Jianzheng's brilliance." Chu Kaiwei saw through his lie but still said, "Tell me the contents of the alchemy text first." Su Qian hesitated. "The content is quite profound, and I'm afraid you won't understand it. It requires a detailed explanation to fully grasp it." Chu Kaiwei snorted disdainfully. "Throughout the 9 provinces, when it comes to alchemy, our Tianjin alchemists are the best in the world." Su Qian took a deep breath and then recited various terms from high school chemistry. Chu Kaiwei felt dizzy listening to him. What is all this? Is he messing with me? She then snatched back the sugar cane and walked away, but as she reached the door, Chu Kaiwei glanced back at Su Qian and said, "RC Tianjin only accepts child disciples." Su Qian reached out as if to say something, but only after did he mutter, "I'm also a child." The guard beside him comforted Su Qian. "Aren't you embarrassed to say something like that? Besides, how old are you? Do you not have any self-awareness?" Su Jiping, a 7th-rank green-robed official, was sentenced to beheading due to the lost tax silver case. The male members of his family were exiled, and the female members were sent to the Jiafangxi. The 5-day deadline had passed. He knew his life was nearing its end, but he couldn't help thinking about how he had implicated his family. Su Jiping had been loyal and patriotic all his life, diligent and dedicated. Yet, in the end, he had come to such a miserable fate. The guard beside him couldn't bear to listen anymore. "After signing and fingerprinting, you can leave." Su Jiping thought he had misheard, but the guard directly returned his official uniform to him. Su Jiping looked at his uniform as if in a dream. What exactly happened? His wife immediately chimed in, "It must be our son. He's been running around these past few days, and the court has shown us mercy." But Su Jiping was puzzled. Even if the death penalty was waived, it shouldn't be possible to retain my official position. Su Jiping asked in confusion. The guard calmly said, "The case has been solved, and the tax silver has been recovered. According to the laws of Defeng, if a family elder commits a crime, the descendants can atone for the crime on their behalf." His wife tearfully praised their son for being outstanding, a true dragon among men. But then she glared at Su Jiping and said, "Back then, I wanted him to practice martial arts, but you refused, insisting on letting that little brat Su Qian train instead." Her tone was clearly accusatory, but Su Jiping had no choice. His son simply wasn't cut out for martial arts. The guard couldn't bear to listen anymore, and coughed twice. "It was your nephew, Su Qian. He helped Lord Fu-yin solve the tax silver case. He just left and is probably waiting for you at the back gate now." The couple felt as if they had been struck by lightning. His wife was especially shocked. It wasn't our son who saved the family? How could it be that unlucky nephew? Wasn't he in prison? The thought made her dizzy. Meanwhile, at the back gate of the government office, Su Qian had been waiting for a long time. Just as he was growing impatient, Su Jiping and his family emerged. Su Qian quickly greeted them. When Su Jiping saw his nephew, the martial artist felt a surge of warmth in his heart. Tears welled up in his eyes as he strode forward and clapped Su Qian on the shoulder with great force. "Well done, nephew." He nearly knocked Su Qian over. "Uncle, you're at the peak of chi refinement, a whole rank above me." Su Qian said this naturally, without any hint of awkwardness. But soon, his attention was drawn to a figure nearby. "I actually have such an extraordinary sister?" Su Qian was stunned. Su Lingyue was the daughter of Su Jiping and Li Ru, and also Su Qian's cousin. In the original host's memories, the memories of his sister were very vague. Due to Li Ru's influence, he had been somewhat hostile toward his cousins. However, there was one exception. Su Qian's youngest cousin, Su Lingyin. The original host didn't like his cousins, but he was relatively kind to this youngest cousin, because her appearance didn't resemble her mother's. Su Lingyin ran over to Su Qian, asking for candy. But he had just come out of prison, and had no candy to give. Su Lingyin looked disappointed. Su Qian looked at his youngest cousin, who seemed a bit slow, and realized she must have taken after her mother. Li Ru stiffly turned her head away, reluctantly saying, "Thank you." Su Qian's mind flashed back to a vague memory. When he had been driven to a small courtyard next to the Su residence by his aunt, Su Qian had been furious. Swearing to the heavens, "I, Su Qian, will rise to greatness one day. You'll regret this." Now, looking back, it felt incredibly awkward. Wasn't this just a version of "don't bully the young and poor"? But in this case, it was his aunt who had underestimated him. Su Qian now viewed the relationship between the original host and his aunt from a third-person perspective. He realized that it wasn't entirely the aunt's fault. Su Qian's martial arts training cost over 100 taels of silver annually, which was equivalent to 20 to 30 years of savings for an ordinary family, and that was for a relatively well-off household. It was no wonder the aunt harbored resentment. So, Su Qian sincerely apologized, but the aunt interrupted him. "Don't rush to apologize. Wait until we get home and have dinner, then say it again." Li Ru gritted her teeth in anger, and Su Pingji felt a headache coming on. He quickly stepped in to mediate. "Let's go home first. Do you know what it means to be shameless? If heaven does not give birth to me, Su Xinyan, the great Feng dynasty will remain in eternal darkness." Su Xinyan kicked open the door. The home he had lived in for 19 years was now empty and desolate. It was a pitiful sight. He stepped over the threshold, staggered a few steps inside, then turned back to close the door. He couldn't attract the attention of the authorities. Scholars had their pride. He walked from the outer courtyard to the inner courtyard, as if walking through the long journey of his life. At 3, he learned to read. At 5, he memorized poems. By 10, he had mastered the classics of the sages. At 14, he entered Yunlu Academy to study. By 18, he was a provincial scholar. It was no exaggeration to say he was a prodigy. His intelligence, his extensive knowledge, shaped his proud personality. In front of his family, he had always been proud, successful, and respected. He was the future pillar of the Su family. As a man of 7 feet, he would rather die gloriously than live in humiliation. With this thought, Su Xinyan downed the wine in his hand and smashed the bottle on the ground. Fueled by the alcohol, he picked up a brush and wrote the most profound farewell poem of his life. "Alive, I am a free spirit. Dead, I am an unyielding ghost." Su Xinyan let out 3 long cries, took out a prepared rope, and hung it from the ginkgo tree in the inner courtyard. "Heaven is unjust. If heaven does not give birth to me, Su Xinyan, the great Feng dynasty will remain in eternal darkness." Under the ginkgo tree, the scholar standing on a chair suddenly removed his hat and threw it away. He shook his head vigorously, letting his hair fall loose. He was wild and unrestrained, free-spirited and untamed. He placed his head in the noose, and then he saw his family, their expressions stiff and their eyes blank. "I, Su Xinyan, have lived a life of freedom and unrestraint. I, Su Xinyan, am a man of unparalleled talent. Heaven is unjust. If heaven does not give birth to me, Su Xinyan, the great Feng dynasty will remain in eternal darkness." Su Xinyan looked at his family, who had unexpectedly returned. He had been one step away from death. At this moment, Su Xinyan's soul had already died. The cultivation systems in this world were diverse. Besides the martial arts system, which was considered the most straightforward, there were also alchemists, Confucian scholars, Buddhists, Taoists, witches, and ancient masters. 600 years ago, the founding emperor of the Great Feng dynasty and the first head of the Tianjin divided these systems into ranks. Su Qian was a 9th-rank martial artist in the martial arts system, while his uncle was an 8th-rank peak chi refinement expert and a 7th-rank spirit refinement expert. Beyond that, Su Qian didn't know much. On the other hand, he knew quite a bit about the alchemist system of the Tianjin, as it was unique to the Great Feng dynasty and highly publicized. The inventions and creations of 6th-rank alchemists were integrated into everyday life. But beyond that, Su Qian didn't know the higher ranks. As for the other systems, he only knew their names. Having traveled to this world, he had only scratched the surface of its mysteries. But this wasn't entirely the original host's fault. The original host had grown up in the capital, and his knowledge was limited. He had only known what was within his reach, and that was all. However, Su Qian was puzzled. Why were there no memories of the original host's death, or the moments before? As for himself, after resigning from the police force, he had chosen to go into business, becoming a diligent and hard-working entrepreneur. His future should have been stable enough to afford a mortgage, pay a bride price, and start a family. As long as his neighbor wasn't surnamed Wang, life would have been peaceful and good. But who could have expected that while celebrating with friends at a bar, he would drink too much, suffer alcohol poisoning, and meet his untimely end? Just when he had finally secured his place in the middle class, he was suddenly sent back to a feudal society. He still had 600,000 yuan saved up for a house. The saddest thing in life is when the person is gone, but the money remains. Well, at least it could serve as an inheritance for his parents. Then, he suddenly remembered that his computer hard drive still contained 120 gigabytes of wife material that he hadn't deleted. What does it feel like to be called Big Brother? A girl in a green dress entered through the side door. She was the aunt's personal named Louis. Big Brother, the master is calling you to dinner. Louis' eyes and brows were filled with joy. She had been sold into the Su family at the age of 10 to serve them. After the Su family fell into trouble, the servants were dismissed. She had been worried about her future, but to her surprise, within just 5 days, the Su family had turned things around. Su Qian quickly corrected her. Don't call me Big Brother. Louis was confused. But you are Big Brother. Su Qian sighed. Forget it. It's not like I'm married anyway. The two walked side by side out of the small courtyard and into the Su residence. Louis hesitated for a moment and said, the master and madam were arguing earlier. What happened? Su Qian asked. It seems the madam insisted on knowing how the tax silver case was tampered with. As for who did it, the master couldn't answer. They went back and forth and ended up arguing. Louis whispered, Big Brother, do you know? Su Qian pondered. On the way back from the government office, he had told his uncle that the tax silver wasn't stolen, but had been swapped. At the time, the aunt had said nothing, but it seemed she had been keeping it in mind. As Su Qian stepped through the doorway, he heard the sound of crying. Su Lingyin, who was as small as a bean, had her little arms stretched behind her, leaning forward and tilting her head up, letting out piercing cries directed at her mother. The uncle calmly sipped his wine, while Su Lingyue ate quietly. Su Xinyan was still reeling from the collapse of his persona. The aunt held her forehead, looking as if she had a headache. Seeing Louis arrive, she immediately said, Take her away, take her away. Su Qian glanced at the wailing Su Lingyin and asked gently, What's wrong? The little bean accused her mother of lying. Mom said if we could go home, she would take me to Guiwei Tower. But Dad just said Guiwei Tower is the top restaurant in the capital, frequented only by high-ranking officials and nobles. They don't serve commoners or wealthy merchants. For a child who couldn't even remember her siblings' names, to remember Guiwei Tower was mainly because she had been there once before. This showed that the child wasn't stupid, but rather, her talents were misplaced. Old Su, you're something else, using your daughter as a tool to divert the blame. Su Lingyin was the aunt's weak spot. At the time, it had just been a casual remark, but given the circumstances, the aunt sighed. Her mind is biased. The aunt is untrustworthy. Su Qian instinctively felt this way about her, but at that moment, a small hand tugged at Su Qian's clothes. Big Brother, take me there. The little bean climbed up his pants, clinging to him. What kind of place is Guiwei Tower? It costs 1 tael of silver per person. Su Qian picked up the little bean and handed her to Lu Yi. The little bean wailed as she was taken away. The aunt kicked her husband under the table, glaring at Su Qian with a hint of annoyance. Su Pingji felt. He glanced at his son, who had always been curious, but unfortunately, Su Xinyan was socially dead. A dead man couldn't speak, he could only eat. The food was mediocre, mainly because there was no high-quality broth. After all, they had just returned home. Su Qian ate as if chewing wax. He glared at his beautiful younger sister, Lingyue. Why do you keep sneaking glances at me? The girl's face instantly turned red. I just wanted to know how you figured out the case from the case files. There's no such thing as a perfect crime. Except for coincidences, any man-made case will leave traces. Su Qian explained. Su Xinyan straightened his back, listening intently. First, I noticed. By examining the weight of the silver during the transport, Su Qian went through his reasoning process. The more Su Xinyan listened, the brighter his eyes became, as if he had finally found answers to his questions. His hands under the table clenched into fists. The 16-year-old beauty lowered her head, hiding the admiration in her eyes. Su Pingji, excited, slammed the table, cursing under his breath. So that's how it was. I didn't even notice. But the aunt ruthlessly deflated her husband's ego. You idiot. You can't even measure properly. What is a pig teammate? Su Pingji was a perfect example. Su Qian asked, did they bring guards? When they counted the silver? Su Pingji thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes, they did. How did you know? Su Qian looked at him with a mix of frustration and resentment. Why wasn't this mentioned in the case files? Su Pingji shrugged. It was just... At this point, Su Pingji started grumbling. That guy Lu handed me a bottle of osmanthus wine. You know how deep my tolerance is. So I had a few drinks. I didn't pay much attention to anything else. I almost forgot about it. Su Qian was almost speechless at his uncle. If this detail... He could have figured out the truth much faster. He wouldn't have had to waste so many brain cells. Meanwhile, Su Xinyan, who had been listening, pointed out the key issue. So it seems that this Lu guy is most likely the one who framed you. Su Pingji finally realized the truth. But suddenly, as he looked around at his family, a painful memory resurfaced. It's all my fault. I almost ruined our family. Su Pingji's voice was filled with guilt. Listen, back during the Battle of Shanghai, your father and I promised each other that we would survive together and rise to greatness together. I survived, but your father died in battle. At that time, I thought that to live a better life, I had to change my ways. I couldn't just be cannon fodder anymore, so I sent you to study and chose to let you practice martial arts. But deep down, I was being selfish. The aunt rolled her eyes. Yes, all your heart went to your nephew. Su Qian instinctively retorted. From what you're saying, does that mean Su Xinyan isn't your real son? The aunt slammed the table. You little brat, how dare you say such a thing? Su Pingji rubbed his temples. Enough? I just barely escaped death, and now I have to listen to you two argue? Everyone lowered their heads and continued eating. Speaking of the Battle of Shanghai, Su Qian had some recollection of it. The world was vast and boundless, with the Great Feng dynasty dominating the Central Plains, claiming to be the rightful ruler of the land. Great Feng was founded on martial prowess and governed by Confucian principles. At its peak, nations from all over came to pay tribute. The dynasty had lasted for 600 years. 20 years ago, Great Feng allied with the nations to fight against the northern barbarians and the southern barbarians at Shanhai Pass. The total number of troops involved reached over 1 million. The war lasted only 6 months, but it was one of the bloodiest conflicts in history, known as the Battle of Shanghai. Su Qian's father had died in that war. At that moment, the little bean, who had returned because she was hungry, said something that nearly made the aunt faint on the spot. Mom, why did we have to live in that dark room? We were always hungry. Everyone fell silent. The little bean had mistaken the prison cell for a dark room. Su Pingji said guiltily, it was my fault. The little bean hummed, then added, last night, I woke up hungry and caught a bug. She then gestured to show what it looked like. The aunt's heart ached. Did you eat it? But the little bean continued. Then I heard Mom's stomach growling, so I put it in her mouth. Mom ate it really fast. At that moment, the aunt's mind kept replaying those words. I put it in her mouth. Mom ate it really fast. The aunt nearly fainted on the spot. Then, the sound of the little bean being spanked echoed through the room. How much could modern chemistry drive ancient people to madness? The tallest building in the Great Feng capital, the Star Observation Tower, was the headquarters of the Tianjian. A young girl in a yellow dress climbed the stairs with light steps. As she passed the 7th floor, she heard a commotion coming from the alchemy room. A group of alchemists in white robes were arguing heatedly. Why did it fail again? The steps are so simple. I told you, it must be the amount of salt. I think it's the water or the fire. I saw senior brother Juan burn the salt earlier. It's too hard. The alchemy to turn salt into silver is too hard. I can't do it. The girl in the yellow dress, named Kaiwei, twitched her lips. These people were still trying to make fake silver. After the tax silver case was solved, the emperor, impressed by the power of the fake silver, ordered the Tianjian to replicate it. Thus, the alchemists of the Tianjian threw themselves into their work, working day and night. In a grueling 996 schedule, they had been at it for 2 days straight, failing repeatedly, but persisting nonetheless. At that moment, someone noticed Chu Kaiwei passing by. Chu Caiwei's heart sank. She was quickly dragged into the alchemy room. Junior sister Kaiwei, come and take a look. Is there something wrong with the steps? You're the only one who successfully made fake silver. Chu Kaiwei looked at the materials on the table, feeling utterly exhausted. The senior brother's process was correct. She had followed the same steps when she made the fake silver at the Su residence. But later, when she tried to replicate it in private, she failed. Senior brothers, calm down. This is an ancient alchemy technique. It's profound and complex. It's not something you can master overnight. It requires deep and thorough teaching. To truly understand it, let me teach you a mantra. Remember it well. The alchemy fanatics listened intently. Chu Kaiwei took a deep breath and recited the various chemical terms Su Qian had mentioned before. The alchemy fanatics were completely baffled. They had no idea what she was talking about. What does this mean? They understood, but when combined, they were completely baffled. Chu Kaiwei awkwardly laughed twice, thinking to herself, who knows what this nonsense is? It's just something Su Qian came up with. A senior brother in white robes sighed in admiration. A genius. The person who wrote this mantra is truly a genius of alchemy. Junior sister Kaiwei, who taught you this mantra? Chu Kaiwei thought, great question. I can finally pass the buck. That person is Su Qian, the nephew of Su Pingji, a 7th-rank military officer. You should go ask him. Upon hearing that it was a martial artist, the white-robed alchemists were displeased. Nonsense. Our Tianjian is full of talented people. Why would we need to seek help from an outsider, and a martial artist at that? If word got out, we'd become a laughingstock. Based on different cultivation systems, there were several interesting chains of disdain. Taoists looked down on Buddhists, and Buddhists reciprocated. Alchemists looked down on witches. Witches looked down on ancient masters, and ancient masters looked down on alchemists. Then, Taoists, Buddhists, alchemists, witches, and ancient masters all looked down on martial artists. As for Confucians, sorry to be blunt, but all of you are trash. Unfortunately, Confucianism had declined in recent times. The alchemy fanatics continued to pester Chu Kaiwei. She squeezed her way out of the crowd of white-robed senior brothers and continued up the stairs. In truth, she didn't understand it either. She just wanted to leave this troublesome place as quickly as possible. The top of the star observation tower wasn't a normal roof, but an octagonal platform, aligned with the 8 trigrams, hence it was called the Bagua platform. At the edge of the Bagua platform, an old man in white robes floated in the air, holding a wine cup in one hand and resting his head on the other, gazing down at the capital below, seemingly drunk yet not. The girl in the yellow dress didn't disturb her master, who usually spent his time sitting on the Bagua platform, drinking and enjoying the view. This master, who never bothered with Su Qian, also had his moments of frustration. At the Chang'an County Government Office, a mysterious figure scared everyone as if they had seen a ghost in broad daylight. Someone pointed at Su Qian and stammered, "Are you a human or a ghost?" The magistrate noticed Su Qian's shadow on the ground and felt slightly relieved. He said calmly, "What nonsense are you spouting in court? Do ghosts have shadows?" Su Qian thought for a moment and joked, "Maybe it's a walking corpse." The magistrate's eyes rolled back, and he nearly fainted on the spot. Su Qian quickly clasped his hands and said, "Just kidding." "Greetings, magistrate. Fellow colleagues, I've been released from prison." The magistrate asked, "What happened?" Su Qian recounted the events once more. Only then did everyone understand. Su Qian took out the certificate given by the government office. The magistrate took it and said, "The session is over. Everyone is dismissed." A few familiar constables immediately gathered around, congratulating him. "Surviving a great disaster brings good fortune. You have to treat us. I heard the brothel on Linshui Street just bought a batch of new courtesans. Let's go there tonight." Su Qian's face darkened. "I can treat you to drinks, but paying for women? That's too much." Su Qian was about to say he had no money when he stepped on something hard. Looking down, he saw a piece of broken silver. At that moment, the magistrate came running back, panting. After catching his breath, he said, "Old Wang, the county magistrate wants us to go to the inner hall." Old Wang sighed. What bad luck. But he followed the magistrate anyway. Su Qian took the opportunity to quickly pick up the silver. Safe and sound, Su Qian asked the constable beside him, puzzled. "The boss doesn't look too happy. What happened?" The constable sighed. "It's a big case. A wealthy merchant in Kongping Street was murdered a few days ago. The county magistrate is furious. He's been scolding Boss Wang every day." Su Qian was puzzled. "Just a merchant died. Why is the county magistrate so angry?" The constable explained. That merchant had connections with a high-ranking official in the capital. Pressure must have come from there, and this year is a Gengzi year. Su Qian realized. It's the year of the Imperial Inspection. The Imperial Inspection was the Great Feng Dynasty's evaluation system conducted every 3 years. Officials who failed would be demoted, or even dismissed. It was a matter of career prospects, so it made sense. The victim had connections in the capital, and if the case wasn't solved, the magistrate's career would be in jeopardy. At that moment, the door was slammed open. Then, Boss Wang stormed in, cursing, "The thief is gone. Where are we supposed to find him?" The constable quickly went to comfort him, but Boss Wang just sighed repeatedly. "Today is just my unlucky day. Not only did I get scolded, but I also lost a tael of silver." Su Qian hid in a corner, stifling a laugh. "So it was your silver I found." Just then, the constable leaned in and whispered, "Boss, why not find a scapegoat?" Though his voice was low, Su Qian heard it clearly. Finding a scapegoat meant pinning the crime on an innocent person. Boss Wang considered it and thought it wasn't a bad idea. He ordered, "Go to the slums in the west of the city and pick a few old troublemakers who often commit crimes. Make sure they're older." But at that moment, Su Qian grabbed the constable's shoulder and pulled him back, saying, "We can't let the real culprit get away." The others, seeing this, quickly stepped forward to stop Su Qian. "I know your family just went through a tough time, so you're sensitive about these things. But the boss is getting scolded by the magistrate every day. There's no other way." But Su Qian ignored them. Boss Wang suddenly stood up, staring at Su Qian. "Then tell me, how should we investigate?" Su Qian shook off the hands gripping his shoulders, struck a confident pose and said, "Give me the case files." After receiving the files, Su Qian began his analysis. The victim, Zhang Yurue, was 51 years old, a wealthy merchant living on Kongping Street. He had a fortune, but his first wife had died young. He remarried a woman 20 years his junior. Zhang Yurue had one son from his first wife and no other children. A 20-year age gap? Su Qian thought to himself. This is a classic case of an old man marrying a young woman, an old cow eating tender grass. For days ago, Zhang Yurue went to the countryside to collect rent. He returned home around midnight. His sleeping wife suddenly heard a scream. When she went out to check, Zhang Yurue was already dead in the courtyard. She also saw a dark figure climbing over the wall and fleeing. Su Qian asked, "Did you question the night patrol?" The constable replied, "No suspicious individuals were seen in the area that night." The capital had 3 layers of walls. The outer city had night patrols, but no curfew. The city gates were open 24 hours a day. Merchants could come and go freely, as long as they had the proper permits. Su Qian asked again, "How much?" The constable sighed. Nothing was stolen. The victim had just returned from collecting rent. He had taxed silver, copper coins, and some grain. How could the thief carry away large boxes of silver after killing him? Su Qian immediately sensed, if I were the thief and had scouted the place beforehand, I would have chosen to strike the next day, not today. Boss Wang sipped his tea and said calmly, "So, Mr. Su, who is the murderer, and where is he?" Su Qian quickly laughed it off. "Don't rush me. I saw in the case files that there were footprints on the outer wall of Zhang's residence. Doesn't that prove the thief climbed over the wall to escape? So the young widow's testimony is true." Boss Wang still looked indifferent. "What's the problem with that?" Su Qian asked. "Why were there footprints?" Boss Wang was getting impatient. "Because there's a flower bed by the wall. The thief had to pass through it when climbing over the wall. That's why there are footprints on the outer wall." Su Qian raised his voice. "Then why aren't there any footprints inside the courtyard in the case files?" Boss Wang was stunned. The constable stepped in to explain. Maybe the thief was careful when entering and didn't leave any traces, but after killing, he was in a hurry to escape and left footprints in his haste. Su Qian closed his eyes. This is the first suspicious point. If the thief could leap over the wall without leaving footprints on the flower bed, with such light-footed skills, then when escaping, he wouldn't need to step on the wall for leverage. Second, the victim died from a blunt force trauma to the back of his head. Why blunt force? If the murderer was after money, wouldn't a knife or sword be more efficient? Boss Wang stood up. A blunt force strike to the back of the head is a sure kill. It shows the killer had murderous intent, but why use blunt force instead of a sharp weapon? Su Qian's next words struck him like lightning. Unless the killer didn't have a suitable weapon at hand. Finally, the third point, which I find most suspicious, is that when the victim's family was brought to the county office for questioning, Zhang Yang fainted due to morning sickness. The doctor later discovered she was pregnant. The constables sighed in sympathy, feeling sorry for her. Su Qian was getting annoyed. "Can you all just focus on the case and stop interrupting?" Su Qian coughed twice. To interrupt them. Zhang Yang is 20 years younger than the victim. She's been married to him for nearly 10 years. Why did she suddenly get pregnant now? Boss Wang was shocked. Is there something more to this? Su Qian continued. Maybe the child isn't the victim's. Boss Wang's breathing became heavy. "Explain yourself clearly." Su Qian took a sip of tea to moisten his throat. "Maybe this isn't a burglary case, but a case of adultery and murder. Zhang Yang was having an affair behind her husband's back. The lover could be an outsider, or the victim's own son. They took advantage of the victim being away to collect rent, to meet secretly, but unexpectedly, the victim returned early and caught them in the act. A fight broke out, and in a fit of rage, the lover grabbed a vase, or some other blunt object, and killed the victim. Zhang Yang and her lover hastily cleaned up the scene, and dragged the victim's body to the courtyard, making it look like a burglary. Since the lover had to sneak in, he must have scouted the area beforehand, learning the patrol routes of the night watchman. That's why he wasn't caught by the patrols. If the thief was really after money, he wouldn't have struck that night. Instead, he would have waited for the victim to exchange the collected rent into banknotes, which would be easier to carry away. Zhang Yang's testimony was designed to steer your thoughts toward the idea of a robbery. The constables were stunned. To deduce the murderer just by reading the case files? Su Qian, this is no joke. Don't talk nonsense. Boss Wang was still skeptical. Why do you think the lover could be the victim's son? Su Qian slowly sipped his tea, then said, I have 2 reasons to suspect him. The victim's son, Zhang Xian, stated in his testimony that he was in the study reviewing accounts that night. Zhang Yang was awakened by the scream, which means the noise was loud. But as someone who was awake, he didn't hear a single sound. Does that make sense? Second, if no traces of the thief entering through the flower bed can be found, then this so-called thief might not exist at all. Based on this, the victim's son is highly suspicious. Boss Wang asked, so the footprints on the wall were likely left deliberately to mislead us? Su Qian nodded. Just compare the victim's son's boots, and you'll know. Boss Wang said, even a fool knows not to leave his own footprints. Su Qian quickly flattered him. Truly a divine Then, Boss Wang went to explain the case to the county magistrate, but he took all the credit for solving the case. The magistrate scoffed. Do you think I don't know your capabilities? A bunch of incompetent fools, who are only good at lining their pockets, and useless when it comes to real work. Boss Wang broke out in a cold sweat and no longer dared to take credit. He confessed everything, revealing that Su Qian was the one who solved the case. After a while, the court was reconvened. The victim's wife and son were brought back in. The magistrate slammed the gavel, demanding, "How did you two kill Zhang Yurui? Confess." Zhang Xian cried out, "Your Honor, how can you say such a thing? How could I kill my own father?" The magistrate glared at them. "Stop playing dumb." The magistrate cleared his throat and asked, "Where were you when it happened?" "I was in the study." "Why weren't you with your wife?" "I was reviewing accounts." "Do you have any witnesses?" "It was the middle of the night." "Who would be there?" The magistrate then turned to Zhang Yang. "I ask you, you've been married to Zhang Yurui for 10 years without children. Why are you pregnant now? Did you and your stepson conspire to murder your husband?" Zhang Yang collapsed to the ground, crying, "I'm innocent. My husband's health was poor, and he had been receiving treatment for years. It was only recently that I became pregnant with his child. How can you accuse me of murdering my husband based on this?" Su Qian watched from the side, feeling exasperated. "Magistrate, with your approach, how can you possibly uncover the truth?" The magistrate slammed the gavel again. "You said you saw a dark figure kill your husband and climb over the wall. Then why did the constables find no footprints or trampled flowers when they searched the flower bed?" Zhang Yang was speechless. Zhang Xian spoke up, "Your Honor, how would my mother know how the thief entered the house? If your constables can't find the culprit, you can't just pin the blame on us." Su Qian almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "Mother and son? Don't insult those words, okay?" The magistrate was furious. He picked up the gavel, ready to order a beating. Zhang Xian protested, "Your Honor, are you going to force a confession? My uncle works in the Ministry of Justice. Aren't you afraid of being impeached?" The magistrate's face fell. The Ministry of Justice was filled with upright officials who acted as censors, ready to bite anyone they disliked. They would impeach anyone at the drop of a hat. Thinking of this, the magistrate was enraged. "A commoner dares to threaten me? Guards, give him 20 lashes." But he knew that even if Zhang Xian confessed after the beating, when the case was sent to the Ministry of Justice, his uncle could still use his connections to overturn the verdict. This could lead to the magistrate being accused of forcing a confession. At that moment, Su Qian tapped the constable on the shoulder and whispered, "Help me pass a message to the magistrate." "Su Qian, why are you here?" "Tell the magistrate that I have a good way to handle this case." After a while, Zhang Yang was taken to a separate room and locked up. Just as she was feeling uneasy, the door opened. Su Qian entered with a pot of tea. "Don't be nervous. Let's just chat casually. You can call me Officer Su." Zhang Yang was confused. "Ma, what?" Su Qian poured her a cup of tea. "Looking at your gold and silver jewelry, Zhang Yurui must have treated you well. Actually, I think, given your age, it's likely Zhang Yurui's fault that you couldn't conceive for so many years." Zhang Yang looked aggrieved. "It's all my fault. My body just wasn't to conceive until now." Su Qian continued. "Did Zhang Yurui often visit brothels?" "Of course. Since ancient times, wealthy men and officials always visit brothels." Su Qian sighed. "This Zhang Yang is really tough to crack." Zhang Yurui was over 50 and still frequented brothels. His energy must have been drained. "Now I'm almost certain that the child in your belly belongs to the neighbor, old Wang." Su Qian said, "I suddenly understand you. Zhang Yurui, over 50, spent his time in brothels, neglecting you. It's only natural that you sought comfort elsewhere, but killing him was wrong." Zhang Yang accidentally dropped her teacup. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've read the case files. Zhang Xian is 7 years younger than you. What do you mean by that? This is a case of an old hawk preying on a young chick." Zhang Yang pretended not to understand. Su Qian continued, "Zhang Yang, you were lonely, left alone in an empty room, so you seduced your stepson and committed an immoral act. On the night of the incident, while Zhang Yurui was away collecting rent, you and your stepson had an affair. But Zhang Yurui returned early and caught you in the act. Father and son fought, and you hit Zhang Yurui from behind with a vase, killing him. To cover up the crime, you dragged his body to the courtyard and staged it as a burglary and murder. Zhang Xian deliberately left footprints on the wall. Corroborate your story." Zhang Yang was stunned. She stood up abruptly. "I didn't. I'm innocent." Su Qian noticed her trembling hands and knew his guess was 70 to 80% correct. "Aren't you curious how I know all this so clearly?" Zhang Yang's heart skipped a beat. "Has Zhang Xian already confessed?" "That's impossible." Su Qian pressed on. "Do you think your lover wouldn't confess because you thought you covered your tracks perfectly? But in reality, there are many flaws. Zhang Xian only left footprints on the wall when leaving, but not when entering. If the thief had decent skills, he would have been even more careful when escaping, leaving no footprints. Second, Zhang Yurui died from blunt force trauma, not a sharp weapon. According to the laws of Great Feng, if someone breaks into a house without reason, the homeowner can kill them without consequence. So, why would a burglar not bring a weapon? Yet Zhang Yurui died from blunt force trauma. Third, why did the county office insist that you killed and not a thief? Because you made a critical mistake. Zhang Yurui's body was found with his feet facing the house, and his head facing outward. The fatal wound was on the back of his head. This means the killer attacked him from behind with a blunt object. A burglar, upon seeing the homeowner return, would either stay hidden or flee. Why would he deliberately attack and kill someone, then leave empty-handed? It doesn't make sense. Zhang Yang's clenched hands finally relaxed. She never expected there to be so many flaws. Su Qian continued, "You have nothing to say, do you?" Zhang Xian has nothing to say either, so he exposed you. He also said that you shamelessly seduced him. He didn't want to continue the entanglement, but you threatened him with the child in your belly. That night, it was also you who took advantage of the chaos to kill Zhang Yurue. Zhang Xian knew there were too many flaws, and there was no escape, so he confessed to the county magistrate. He spent 500 taels of silver to smooth things over, shifting all the blame onto you, making you bear the crime of murdering your husband alone. You know best what kind of person Zhang Xian is, right? Zhang Yang couldn't help but feel a bit panicked. Su Qian sighed inwardly. I don't know what kind of person Zhang Xian is, but I know how fragile a relationship based on lust, not love, can be. Moreover, Zhang Xian is a rich second-generation heir, with family wealth and youth on his side. A whole ocean of opportunities awaits him. Why would he sacrifice himself for a woman? Su Qian continued. The county magistrate is honest and just. He doesn't blindly trust Zhang Xian's one-sided story. He sent me here to interrogate you. If you confess honestly, the magistrate has promised to spare your life. Zhang Yang, as if grasping at a lifeline, immediately confessed without hesitation. In truth, Su Qian had lied to her. According to the laws of the Great Feng dynasty, adultery or murdering one's husband was punishable by death for the woman, while the adulterer would be beheaded and displayed publicly. There was no possibility of a pardon. When Zhang Xian saw Zhang Yang's confession, he was caught off guard and could no longer defend himself. In despair, he also confessed. The magistrate, holding the two confessions in his hands, cursed repeatedly, "Bastards!" But he didn't forget to praise Su Qian. Su Qian quickly clasped his hands in humility, while also showering the magistrate with flattery. It's all thanks to your guidance, sir. I've only learned a few tricks by observing you. Wang Bu too, who was watching from the side, was a bit stunned. This isn't right. When this kid first arrived, he was honest and stubborn, only focused on doing his work. A real greenhorn. How did he suddenly become so skilled at solving cases? What is brothel culture? Today, Su Qian will give you a brief introduction. Brothels cater to the common folk, while high-class establishments serve wealthy merchants and high-ranking officials. These are akin to modern hair salons and exclusive clubs. In the Great Feng dynasty, when discussing brothel culture, one cannot overlook the Jiafangxi. The courtesans of Jiafangxi are all stunning beauties, with one notable characteristic. They are all family members of disgraced officials. Su Qian helped Old Wang solve the case, and in his joy, Old Wang decided to take Su Qian to the brothel. The colleagues around them stifled their laughter, thinking, the rookie is about to grow up. Unfortunately, Old Wang wasn't planning to treat him. They would each pay for themselves. Su Qian immediately lost interest. Besides, losing his virginity would prevent him from reaching the qi refining stage in cultivation. So he put on a serious face and said, I'm not that kind of person. But no one paid him any attention. Old Wang continued boasting about Fuxiang, the top courtesan at Jiafangxi. If I hadn't already had an appointment that night, I would have had my way with her. Su Qian suddenly became interested. How much does a night with her cost? Old Wang held up 3 fingers. 30 taels. Su Qian snatched a peanut from a colleague nearby and said, Boss, don't just drink. If you ate something, you wouldn't be this drunk. Su Qian thought to himself, what a joke. 30 taels could buy several young girls. You could even form a mahjong table at home. Only a fool would spend that much on a night with a top courtesan. Soon after, Su Qian went home alone. The first thing he did upon returning was to write in his diary. After all, I'm not a saint. Today is the 18th. My uncle was right. I need to change my way of life. In this shitty society, rising too high isn't necessarily a good thing. Many high-ranking officials have had their families ruined. What kind of person can live a comfortable life? I've done some research. The middle class lives more comfortably than the average person and avoids high-level conflicts. It's fine to suffer small losses in daily life. This class of people lives the most comfortably. Also, I found a coin of silver in the market today. October 19th, cloudy. I must have money. In this world, gold is more reliable than silver. Although I have no status, I guess you win some, you lose some. I plan to resign in a few days and stop being a constable at the yamen. 2 taels of silver and a dan of rice a month. When will I ever afford a night with a top courtesan at Jiafangxi? October 20th, cloudy. I won't rush to resign yet. I'll get my business going first. Today, I saw a colleague extorting merchants with a warrant. It didn't sit well with me, but I know this is the norm in society. Yet, I can't change anything. Also, I found a coin of silver at the yamen today. October 21st, sunny. Today, Old Wong took me to the brothel. My impression of brothels has changed. It's a place where you can enjoy opera and physical pleasures. I'm filled with regret. I'm still cultivating my essence, so I can't lose my virginity. Then, I found a coin of silver at the brothel, which I used to pay for the opera and snacks. Am I on a lucky streak lately? October 22nd, listening to music at the brothel. October 23rd, listening to music at the brothel. October 24th, listening to music at the brothel. Old Wong asked me why I was so happy. Because free stuff makes me happy. October 27th, listening to music at the brothel. Didn't find any silver today. Had to pay out of my own pocket. Ugh. This smoky, filthy place. I'm never coming back. October 28th. This world has gunpowder and fireflies. Soapberries also exist, and they work surprisingly well. So my soap-making plan is ruined. Wait, I can make glass. These ancient people have never seen it before. October 29th. Turns out glass already exists. I need to find another way. Today, I found my uncle's secret stash at home. A coin of silver. October 30th. Listening to music at the brothel. October 31st. Today, I came up with another money-making plan. Improving paper quality. If I can make better paper, I'll be rolling in money. I'll eat the best food and sleep with the most beautiful courtesans. Wait, let me think. I know nothing about paper making. Today, I found a coin of silver in the market. November 3rd. I've spent all my savings. I asked my uncle for a loan, but he's broke too. Su Xinyan found out and first expressed his disdain, then mocked me, and finally gave me 5 taels of silver. If heaven didn't create Su Xinyan, eternity would be like a long night. I'm so moved. Su Xinyan, red-faced, stormed off in a huff. Aside from being sarcastic and tsundere, my cousin is actually quite decent. Erlang, if we weren't sworn brothers, I'd make you the female lead. November 5th. Today, I went to a tea house with the Yamen constables to slack off. It was my first time listening to a storyteller. It suddenly occurred to me that if I wrote the great wuxia novels and the 4 great classical novels from my past life, I could make money while lying around. I'm such a genius. Today, I found another coin of silver. Now I have money for the brothel tomorrow. November 7th. I was so naive. A novel has hundreds of thousands, even millions of words. How can I write that with a brush? Even if I make a charcoal pencil, I can't remember the content of those novels. It's been 10 days since I time traveled, and I've achieved nothing. I'm falling apart. This man has been here for 10 days, but accomplished nothing. At this moment, he truly understands the failure of modern exam-oriented education. He knows a little about everything, but is stuck in a state of half-knowledge, unable to turn what he's learned into practical skills. But the worst part isn't that. He's discovered that the world he's in now, corrupt officials are rampant. Even small-time corrupt officials are praised as good officials. As for honest officials, they're rarer than virgins in a brothel. November 9th. Cloudy. Why hasn't Kaiwei come to see me in the past 4 days? Doesn't she want the legendary alchemy secrets? Her looks are no worse than Lingyue's. With her cute, delicate oval face, and my masterful flirting skills, I might just win her over. I also want to find love. In this cold, indifferent society. Come find me soon. I don't want to struggle anymore. November 10th. I'm still unwilling to let the novel plan die. So, I told my 2 younger sisters the general plot of the Butterfly Lovers. After listening, Lingyue's eyes turned red, but Linyin didn't cry. So, I punched him. He cried. I think it's something he should experience at his age. November 11th. Today, I drank with Li the clerk, in his tipsy state. He mentioned that the princess consort of Prince Junbei is the most beautiful woman in the court. I asked him how beautiful she really is, but he couldn't describe it, because Li the clerk also heard it from the county magistrate. After work, I secretly asked my uncle about it. His expression turned very strange. He tried his best to describe her beauty. With his limited vocabulary, I extracted the core elements. Voluptuous. This sparked a tiny bit of interest and anticipation in me regarding the princess consort. November 12th. To this day, I've achieved nothing. I've shamed my homeland. I've shamed all time travelers. November 13th. This marks my first month in this world. The Yamen salary has been issued. I plan to work hard and take my time with business ventures. November 14th. Listening to music at the brothel. In the small courtyard, Su Qian stood under the eaves, casually throwing a dart. He didn't even aim properly. Yet it hit the bullseye on a wooden stake 20 paces away. This wasn't due to Su Qian's exceptional dart-throwing skills, but rather his incredible luck. Over the past month, he's found a total of 1.2 taels of silver, equivalent to half a month's salary. This amount could sustain an ordinary family of 3 for 3 months if they lived frugally. But the strangest part is that he only ever finds 1 coin of silver at a time. This can't just be luck. Even without asking Yuan Fong, it's clear something's off. Su Qian sighed. System dad, come out already. Stop playing hide and seek with me. The system ignored him. Over the past month, he's tried countless times to awaken the system. The truth is, he doesn't have a system at all. Who would have thought that someone like me, who's never won even 5 yuan in the lottery, could one day evolve into a luck god? But luck gods have short lifespans. One thing is certain. The original owner didn't have this kind of luck. If he did, my aunt wouldn't have despised him. She would have treated him like an ancestor. The whole family would have stopped working and lived off his found money. This kind of unexplained fortune makes me uneasy and unsettled. Su Qian's expression darkened. He sighed. I'll just take it one step at a time. The small courtyard where Su Qian lived was originally occupied by an old steward of the Su family. It was just a wall away from the main Su residence. After the old steward passed away, the courtyard was left vacant. Later, after the original owner had a falling out with his aunt, he moved here in a fit of anger. Today, after repairing the tomb, Su Qian leaped over the 10-foot-high wall to have breakfast at his uncle's house, mainly to save money. Why spend money on breakfast when I can use it for the brothel? In the hall, the family was happily eating breakfast. But suddenly, when the aunt saw Su Qian enter, her good mood instantly vanished. Su Qian pretended not to notice. He stared at his portion of breakfast. A martial artist at the qi refining stage has a much larger appetite than an ordinary person. This breakfast would only fill him halfway. Su Qian glanced at the little bean sprout, his younger sister, and said kindly, "Little Ling, how about giving your big brother one meat bun?" The little bean sprout immediately spread her arms, protecting her food like a mother hen guarding her chicks, and said fiercely, "No, don't be in such a hurry." Su Qian said, "Big brother won't let you suffer a loss." He picked up a meat bun and placed it on her plate. Pointing to the 4 meat buns, he said, "My meat buns are here with you. So, don't these 4 buns belong to both of us now?" Su Lingyin furrowed her little brow, and Su Qian continued to coax her. "Shouldn't we split them evenly?" The little bean sprout's brain worked hard, thinking for a moment, then nodded firmly. Su Qian's scheme succeeded. He pressed his advantage. "You get 2 buns, and Big Brother gets 2 buns. Then, Big Brother will give you half a fried dough stick. Isn't that a good deal?" The aunt shook her head in disbelief. "How did I give birth to such a foolish daughter? It's driving me mad." At that moment, Su Xinyan walked in with a pale face. Su Xinyan, the second son of the Su family, also known as Cijio, was famous for failing to hang himself and instead fainting. He had also reached the peak of his life. With the phrase, "I have no home," Su Xinyan followed the Confucian path of cultivation. The Yunlu Academy was founded by the great disciple of Confucius, and it has a history of 1,200 years. It is a holy land for scholars across the world. The Academy's transcendent status is not only due to its founder being a disciple of Confucius, but also because it is the only remaining academy where one can cultivate the Confucian path. Su Xinyan's enlightenment stage is the 9th rank of the Confucian system. It enhances memory, allows one to read 10 lines at a glance, and strengthens learning ability. But he's still a weakling in combat. These past few days, he's been secluded, trying to compose poetry without success. Now, he's become a soulless puppet. He excels in strategy, but poetry is his weakness. The aunt was heartbroken. "Why are you forcing yourself to write poetry? Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. Don't pay attention to the gossip of outsiders." Su Qian suddenly asked, "Cijio, when will you break through from the enlightenment stage to the 8th rank, self-cultivation?" Su Xinyan shook his head regretfully. "I have no clue for now. My teacher said I need to find it within myself." Su Qian said, "Can you reflect on the enlightenment stage? How did you achieve the enlightenment stage?" Su Xinyan recalled, "By memorizing the classics of the sages and internalizing them, I reached the enlightenment stage. The former requires a lot of time to memorize, while the latter depends on some level of insight." Su Qian was speechless. This is similar to the qi refining stage in the martial arts system, where one must temper their qi and physique over years of training. Su Qian asked, "Then, for self-cultivation, do you also need to temper your physique?" Su Xinyan thought for a moment. The self-cultivation stage is about having no fear in your heart, and every word and action can inspire trust in others. I've tried to deduce the cultivation method based on the abilities of the self-cultivation stage. Did it work? Su Xinyan fell silent. He was starting to get annoyed with his older brother, but Su Qian was still eagerly leaning forward, waiting for an answer. Su Xinyan pretended not to see him, and turned to his mother, saying, "An elder at the academy has passed away. Journey to Qingzhou is long, and the academy students will see him off tomorrow." At this point, Su Xinyan sighed. "I haven't written a farewell poem yet." Su Lingyue said softly, "Second brother, you're not good at poetry." The aunt glared at her. "Your second brother is immensely talented. Poetry just wasn't something he focused on before." Su Pingji, resting his chin on his hand, said, "Just write a few lines. I think that line you blurted out the other day was quite impressive." Su Xinyan coughed awkwardly. He awkwardly changed the subject. "That elder is a renowned scholar, famous for his poetry. The students seeing him off are all talented in poetry. Aside from showing respect to the elder, they also hope to build connections. If I can gain that elder's favor, it would be highly beneficial." Su Xinyan, proud and aloof, often spoke of gentlemen's friendships being as light as water, and gentlemen associating but not forming cliques. But after this crisis, he finally realized the benefits of networking. Su Qian, as the elder brother, felt quite pleased. Su Pingji, at an inappropriate moment, said, "Your maternal grandfather was just like you, only good at writing essays, with no talent for poetry." The aunt retorted, "What do you mean by that? Are you saying my father was lacking?" Xinyan passed the imperial exams, entirely thanks to the Li family's efforts. He takes after me. Look at Lin. He takes after you. And he hasn't even started his education yet. Su Ershu was left speechless. Su Qian, unwilling to back down, said, "Aunt, are you saying the Su family's genes are inferior?" The aunt instinctively fired back. "If you had been cut out for studying, you wouldn't have ended up practicing martial arts. Even your handwriting is a mess." Su Qian ignored her and continued, "Aunt, given Su Erlang's stubborn personality, if he's willing to actively network, that academy elder must be quite influential. Erlang's connections are my connections, and my connections are still my connections. I need to help him. Soon." He had an idea. He decided on a poem. "Let's write it. Today, I'll show Aunt that the Su family is full of talent." Su Ershu looked embarrassed. "Let's not meddle in the affairs of scholars." Su Qian ignored him and calmly recited, 1,000 miles of yellow clouds, the sun dims. Everyone was startled. The north wind blows, geese scatter, snow falls. Su Xinyan was stunned. Vivid imagery flooded his mind. "Do not worry about lacking friends on your journey. Who in the world does not know you?" Su Erlang was so moved that his chopsticks fell from his hand. He murmured to himself, immersed in the poem's Yi Jing, unable to pull himself away. "Do not worry about lacking friends on your journey. Who in the world does not know you? Big brother, you can actually compose such a masterpiece? I never thought I, Su Xinyan, would have the chance to show off like this, even if it's thanks to Big Brother's help, and even if it's only half a poem, it should be enough." Outside the capital, at Mianyang Pavilion, the students gathered to see off their teacher. Aside from the students, two prominent figures also attended. Grandmaster Li Mubai, known as the best Go player in the world. 5 years ago, he played 3 games with Duke Wei, lost all 3, and in frustration, threw the board. He hasn't played since. Military strategist Zhang Shun, whose 6 books on military strategy is still required reading for military officers in the Great Feng dynasty. He is the only strategist in the Great Feng who can be mentioned in the same breath as Duke Wei. Master Yang, styled Ziqian, known as the Ziyang Scholar, was the top scholar in the imperial exams during the 14th year of Yuanjing. The following year, he left the officialdom in disappointment and returned to Yunlu Academy to focus on scholarship, becoming a renowned Confucian scholar. 22 years later, he is now heading to Qinzhou to serve as the Provincial Administration Commissioner. All 3 of them are from Yunlu Academy. Yunlu Academy and the Imperial Academy have a history of rivalry. Yunlu Academy, founded by the great disciple of Confucius, claims to be the true heir of Confucianism. But 200 years ago, due to the Zhongguofan incident, it fell out of favor with the emperor at the time. Coincidentally, a teacher from Yunlu Academy took the opportunity to establish his own school, promoting the idea of preserving heavenly principles and eliminating human desires to please the emperor. With the emperor's support, he founded the Imperial Academy, and thus became a master in his own right. Since then, the Imperial Academy has replaced Yunlu Academy as the primary institution supplying officials to the imperial court. The struggle for Confucian orthodoxy has thus continued for 200 years. Master Yang's journey to Qinzhou is to expand Yunlu Academy's influence and establish a foothold in the officialdom. But to restore the Academy's former glory, it will depend on the younger generation of scholars. At this point, Li Mubai stood up and addressed the students. "Is anyone willing to compose a poem to bid farewell to Master Ziyang?" Master Yang generously offered his personal jade pendant as a prize for the best poem. The students eagerly stepped forward. An hour passed, and the 3 great scholars felt the need to wash their ears. Since the Imperial Academy re-established the orthodoxy of Confucian classics, students have been confined to rigid interpretations, focusing solely on memorization. Poetry and prose have lost their vitality. This is also why Confucianism has been declining in recent times. In the past, Confucianism stood invincible among the various systems. But now, Master Yang, though disappointed, was still willing to listen, to see if any student could produce a decent poem. At that moment, an arrogant voice rang out, "Master, I have a poem." Everyone was stunned, unsure of what was happening. Even Zhang Shun leaned forward, recognizing the voice of his student. Su Xinyan, student Siju, has a poem to bid farewell to Master Ziyang. He had deliberately waited until now, humble and low-key by nature. He didn't want to embarrass his classmates by presenting his poem too early. He definitely wasn't trying to show off. Zhang Shun quickly stepped in. "Su Ziju is my student. He excels in military strategy and policy discussions. He's a promising talent." He silently added in his heart, "But he can't write poetry." Su Xinyan tilted his head at a 45-degree angle, gazing at the sky. He took a deep breath and slowly closed his eyes. 1,000 miles of yellow clouds, the sun dims, the north wind blows, geese scatter, snow falls. Master Yang was amazed. These 2 lines actually had some charm. His return to the court seemed like a promotion, granting him power and influence. But the factions from the Imperial Academy wouldn't just stand by and watch him rise to prominence. Would they allow him to establish a foothold for Yunlu Academy in the officialdom? His journey to Qinzhou was fraught with uncertainty. The road ahead was unclear. Suddenly, Su Xinyan spread his arms, his handsome face glowing in the warm sunlight, radiating a flawless and exquisite beauty. He looked directly at Master Ziyang and spoke the final 2 lines with conviction. Do not worry about lacking friends on your journey. Who in the world does not know you? As the words fell, goosebumps rose on everyone present. Master Yang was stunned and immediately asked for the second half. But after a long wait, Su Xinyan remained silent. Su Xinyan's mouth twitched. This is only half a poem. The scholars present were outraged. They couldn't accept such a thing. Who writes only half a poem? Is this even human? Master Yang calmed himself and smiled. It's fine, it's fine. Even half a poem is extraordinary. Though it's only half a 7-character poem. Given the current decline of poetry in the Great Feng, this poem will surely cause a sensation once it spreads, and be widely sung by scholars across the land. Su Zizio, does this poem have a name? Master Yang asked. Su Xinyan maintained his aloof demeanor, unsure of how to explain. Only by staying aloof could he avoid further questions. It has no name yet, Master Ziyang. Master Yang's smile widened. This poem was written for my farewell, was it not? Su Xinyan nodded. Then let me suggest a name for it, shall I? Grandmaster Li Mubai and military strategist Zhang Shun suddenly understood his intention. They felt a pang of jealousy. How about farewell to Master Ziyang at Mianyang Pavilion? Su Xinyan bowed respectfully. As you wish, master. The 2 great scholars felt even more sour. Shameless old fox. In this era of declining poetry, the spread of this will surely cause a sensation in the scholarly world. It will be sung by scholars across the land. Master Ziyang's reputation will also soar with the poem's fame. The key is that his maneuver effectively tied his name to this poem. It's clear that this old fox would do anything for fame, even at the cost of his dignity. At that moment, Su Xinyan coughed and confessed, Teacher, esteemed masters, this poem was not written by me. It was composed by someone else.